Hey guys, welcome to another episode of El Jefe Shop Shop. This week, today's the day we put the engine back in the Corolla. So this car hasn't had an engine for 10 years. It hasn't run and driven for 20 years. So today is the day we're going to put the engine back in. It's just a stock 4K, but it should run and drive very shortly. It should have an engine in it today, and then we can move on with the other stuff. Alright, so I'm still halfway through the wiring episode, which you would have seen last week or we'll see next week. But what I want to do today is get this engine in, because I've got the gearbox, I've got an engine, I've got a clutch, got all the stuff. So this is an engine that Dale rebuilt for me. Thank you very much to him. This is going to be awesome. So it's just a fresh 4K. It's 40 or 50 thou over, and that's about all I know. It's pretty good. Everything came up really good. Everything like measured correctly and all that stuff. I don't know the first thing about rebuilding an engine. I could probably do it, but all the measurements are beyond me. So this thing's just a stock rebuild. It's got 202 springs in it because one of our springs was dodgy, and I didn't want to put two sets in and make, new was better. So it's got new springs in it. I still need to put the dizzy in it, fuel pump, oil filter, all the manifolds, all that sort of stuff. So there's a fair bit, water pump, thermostat housing, fair bit to still go on there. But what I want to do today is get it off this stand, put the flywheel and the sandwich plate on, get the gearbox on it, and get it all in the car. I'll probably get it in the car and then do all that stuff, but it's beside the point. So I've got new engine mounts, so they need to go on. I need to finish resealing this gearbox, and then that can go on once it's in the car, and hopefully get it all bolted up. Then I can put a tail shaft in, and then at least if we don't have all the wiring and stuff done, I can put a exhaust manifold on this and run an exhaust and stuff, because that's one thing that I am stressing to get done. So as for the wiring, you will have seen or would have seen or will see, one of the two. I've wired up all the car from the back. I've still got a few bits and pieces here, and I've still got a bit of like engine related stuff that's under the dash that I need to run into the firewall. So this has no thing on it, that's why I can't find it. So I've opened up the rad port, got the coil in, got the battery mount in with all the relays and stuff on it. So all I need to do is move that wheel, get the engine crane and straight in. Then I'll get in, and from the back I'll do all the gearbox bolts and stuff. So I'm assuming we can get this in and then the gearbox in and not have to move any of this stuff. The main thing I'd like to leave is the coil, because that was a bit of a pain in the ass to fit. This guy just slips off, and that guy's 4 bolts, so not the end of the world. And then once the engine's in, I can wire up the coolant sensor, the oil pressure sensor, the actual coil itself, the dizzy, all those sorts of things. But the main thing is once that's in, I can put the exhaust manifold on and run an exhaust, so I can start on that. So Aiden's coming around this afternoon to get this engine in, so what I need to do is get it ready to go in. So that should be pretty quick. I just got to finish off the gearbox, find all the bits, clean up this mess. I don't know how it's a mess because I haven't really worked in here. I just keep looking for stuff and then not putting it back, obviously. So let's jump into all of that, all those things that I said. I'm just going to spin around and then we can put the engine in. So before I go any further, I've got the bottom of the gearbox resealed. I've got the little plate on top resealed. Swapped over the reversing sensor thing because it has the original plug on it. All I need to do now is just take these bolts out here and reseal this back case to the actual gearbox. So this is the wagon's gearbox, and I think we've got a random diff in this, but when the wagon was together, something was leaking underneath. And I'm not sure if it was the gearbox or if it was the engine or if it was the diff. So I've resealed the diff, haven't done the pinion seal, which is probably going to be bad. And I'm going to reseal all this. So at least all the stuff that is difficult once it's in the car is done. And then if I find any issues later, we can fix it then. Alright, it's been a couple of hours, got all the clutch and everything all ready to go. The new thrust bearing is in and assembled and greased. The flywheel's all cleaned up, got the bolts, got the torque settings written down. Got new bolts and stuff, so that should be everything. I'm missing a output seal for the gearbox, which I'm about to go get, and then the front plate that bolts on, that the thrust bearing actually slides on. I can't get that off to reseal it. I reckon it was leaking there previously, So Aiden's going to come and have a look in a minute. He's going to help me with the engine. So we'll try and get that off, reseal that, then the gearbox can go back in. So obviously can't put the gearbox in until that's fixed, so hopefully we can do that today, otherwise this engine's going to be sitting on a funny angle and hopefully not in the firewall. The engine bay is as clean as it can be. Got a couple of fresh rags so that we can jam them if it's going to touch. And then got the chain on the new engine with some rags wrapped around it and zip tied. If you can tell, I'm reasonably concerned about touching the paint. And then new engine mounts, bolts in there, got the crane ready. Can't really think of anything else. Got the torque wrench set up, got all the tools we need. So hopefully this can go in and it'll be reasonably smooth if we can fix this gearbox. Alright, so Aiden's here. We're going to put the engine in. So let's cut to the time lapse. Well, that took literally 5 minutes. Now to try and put all the other stuff on. Okay, motor's in, got the engine mounts in, got the bolts, the nuts on loosely, stop it all moving around a bit. Chuck the flywheel and the sandwich plate on, and then try and get this gearbox fixed and put that in.
Hey Jeff.
Hey.
Here's my LS brake.
Yeah, it does. There's like 3 over there. Alright, so I got the sandwich plate on, got the flywheel on, that's all torqued to spec, Loctited, yada yada. Got all the little tabs folded over so it's not going to rattle loose. The engine is in, obviously. The gearbox, we're trying to get this front guy off, and it will not. It is reasonably attached. So I spoke to Aiden and we're going to take that to his place and pull it all apart and pull that out and seal it properly, put it all back together, and then reseal the gearbox, which is pretty annoying because I've just done that. But we can fix that. That's just a tomorrow job. We don't have very good clutch bolts, so these are ones that Aiden grabbed from work, and they're 8.8s, which are okay but not great. And then these ones have been zinced, which I don't trust. So I'm going to get some more 12.9s tomorrow, put the clutch in. I think this is an Exceedi heavy duty. It's just from Auto Pro or whatever. So everything's ready to go in, I just can't. So I'm short of bolts and this gearbox needs to be resealed. So I'm just going to clean up and then work out what else I can do while I'm at this stage, and then hopefully get that gearbox fixed tomorrow and it can go back in. Alright, so I'm under the car, got the engine in yesterday, the flywheel's on, that's all bolted in nicely. So just going to chuck the pressure plate and the clutch plate on and do all that up. And then I'm going to put the gearbox on later on once we finish that. So chuck some bolts in this and get it torqued up. Alright, now the engine is in, the clutch is in. I didn't take any more video of that, but it's on. So the gearbox, I'm going to go rebuild that shortly with Aiden and hopefully, well, reseal that and then hopefully get that in pretty soon. The front needs to be wired. So I've got a bunch of stuff run through the guard here. So I've got the headlight triggers, the high beam trigger, the indicators, the park light. I still need to add starter and all the alternator stuff and the sensors and all that sort of stuff. So I think what I'm going to do is run a small bit of wiring through here and then just try and keep it really simple. The coil's all smoothed and by itself. If I run the wires through there like I was gonna, we're going to have wires coming through here, but then there's going to be a wire coming from the coil to the Dizzy anyway, so it's kind of up in the air at the moment. So I need to wire the headlights, the horns, which I've just put on, and the indicators and the front park lights and just this bit, and then also get the engine back together. So I started getting it back together. Nothing is bolted on, but I found all the right bolts in zinc. So this Dizzy's not even in properly. I need to get an oil filter and just a bunch of stuff. So I'm just trying to throw parts on it as I get them. So picking up a water pump this afternoon and then a few more bits and pieces. So soon it should look like an engine and it should have a gearbox in it. Alright, I'm at Aiden's, the trusty Datsun Steed, pulling the gearbox apart so we can reseal that front seal. So hopefully we get it done. Alright, so we got the front, what do you call that, input shaft?
Yeah.
So we got the input shaft out, got the gearbox sort of apart, slowly getting there. So now we can seal this, because that's what I was worried about, was resealing this. So we successfully got the lay shaft out of the way, and then got the bearing and the front guy out, resealed all that, put it back in, and we're just putting it back together. So we got that shaft back in, the shim's back in. The bolts on the front cover are through bolts, so they need silicone. And then we're just putting this guy back together. And then the back housing can go back on. Alright, what are we doing, Aiden?
We're putting the last, shifter back in. Shift fork, selector fork.
We struggled, but we got it done.
We didn't.
Aiden had the right tools, we would have been much better off, but he has the knowledge, so we got there.
Yeah, you don't need the right tools, you just need the tools that'll get it done.
And we seem to be there.
Look back to our Alice Springs trip.
Yeah, true.
All of the things got done and we got back, didn't we?
Small backpack of tools.
We're using the same small backpack of tools.
Yeah. So one more screw and then put the rehousing back on, reseal the pan, and we're done. Alright, gearbox is back together. It's time to go home. It's like 9:30, so it was probably a good hour and a half, 2 hours. So chuck it in tomorrow. Alright, it's the next day. Got the gearbox on. It's not all the way home and I can't bench press that another time. I've tried heaps of times and it's just not quite going there, so I don't think it's going into the pilot bearing properly. So when I get a bit more energy, I'll pull that out again and try again. So fitted a new fuel pump, got an oil filter, got a new oil pressure sensor, got a new coolant sensor, fitted this guy properly with the new thermostat. New water pump is just on there temporarily to make sure all the pulleys line up. They seem pretty good. Got a new alternator. There's the part number for the alternator. And then all of the other stuff, I'll show you the part numbers in a second. So it's coming along and the belt seems to line up, but the belt is too short, so I need to get another one. And then this fuel pump came with a hole here for like Ke10 style return fuel. This Corolla is non-return, so I need to get a plug for there, and I also need to get a plug for here. So a bit annoying, but they are the things that I need, I guess. Then the dizzy's not in properly because I need to still prime all the oil pressure and actually put oil in it. And that's pretty much it for up here. I need to mount this water pump properly. I've got a little cap for the heater because I'm not running a heater. So I need to pull this off, install it properly, paint this guy, put it all back together, get the right belt, and then the front's done. Need to block that guy off, run a fuel line to the carby, which I don't have the intake manifold or the exhaust manifold on, so there's a bit to do. But I'll try and get that gearbox on later today, and then the engine can actually be bolted in properly. Alright, so I'll just show you which part numbers I use, just in case you're doing this at home. Fuel pump, water pump, we've got the Shorty oil filter, oil pressure sender, which is Ke10. This is for the block off for the water pump. Then the coolant temp sensor as well. So that's all that stuff. I got a new carby off eBay, so that'll go on at a later date. I really need to get this gearbox in and sort out that front belt stuff. So I've been trying to put the clutch in and the gearbox in for most of the day. The pilot bearing went in and then had to make a tool to get it out. Turns out there's still a bronze bush in the back of the crank for the auto that this gearbox was. So Richo's under the car trying to fight with that, and then we can put another bearing back in. It'll go home further this time and then everything should bolt up. Alright, so this has been a nightmare. 2 days ago my mate Richo came over. So we were trying to get the gearbox on. I tried all day, couldn't get it happening. He came around, we tried again, couldn't get it happening. It was getting about 15 mil from all the way on the block and couldn't work it out. It seemed like it wasn't going in the pilot bearing. So we pulled the gearbox back out again, pulled the clutch off, looked at the pilot bearing, thought it had to go in further. In the process of trying to make it go further, we knocked the little rubber seal off of it, so that bearing's no good. So then we had to pull the bearing out. So what we used was a thing we welded up with a nut on either side and a dynabolt in the end, and then put the dynabolt in the end of the bearing, did it up so it grabbed the bearing, pulled it out with a slide hammer. So that was pretty easy. Took a bit of messing around obviously, but it was pretty easy. Put the gearbox back in again and it went on all the way. So the pilot bearing was the issue. So we had to put a new cut pilot bearing back in. Couldn't put it in any further. It was all fine. Anyway, ended up getting the gearbox and the pilot bearing together. The input shaft going into the bearing was really tight. So we just sanded the end of the input shaft just a little bit with some emery tape and got it all good. It's all bolted up nicely. So that's all sweet. So then the next issue we found was the gearbox is really far back in the hole. So as you can see, the shifter section is not centered in that hole. It's quite far back. Not the biggest problem by itself, but then we'll want to move the engine forwards obviously to fix that. And then the gearbox is touching the steering. So I'm going to move the engine back and the gearbox forwards, which obviously we cannot do. Then the gearbox crossmember doesn't line up. That wants to come forwards as well, so everything kind of wants to come forwards at the back, and then, yeah, that's not a thing. So, I've had a long hard think about it, and without moving the crossmember forwards and the engine back a little bit in relation to the crossmember, and there's a lot of messing around there, I can get away with making a few adjustments to the engine mounts, a new gearbox crossmember, and trimming that hole, which it's not the best, but that'll get me around the problem. So what I'm thinking is make a new crossmember, which moves it back however much it needs to be, holds it nice and sturdy. It also needs to come down a little bit. If you notice, the tunnel sort of droops down there, and that's probably the lowest point. So the whole gearbox has to come down a little bit for the shifter hole and stuff. So then if we get the crossmember in the right spot, that'll be fine. And then if we move the engine back in relation to the engine crossmember just a little bit, that'll get me a little bit of space down there. Today's job is to do that. Move the engine back, move the gearbox back, I guess, mount the gearbox again, get the engine actually sitting in there and be bolted in properly. Alright, it's been like half a day. I've got a new gearbox crossmember made up, so these are slotted, obviously. This end is where the stock was, and then we've got up to, I think, 40 mil or so of movement. So if you put the bolt in there, for example, that's stock location, that's how much movement we got, so that's pretty good. Holes are drilled in the middle for this mount here, which is a, I think, auto Ke10 one. So I could have used the Ke70 one, which I only just realized, but I didn't know I had one. So then I can start on the front and make the clearance for the rack that I need to slide the engine back, and then we can make the mounts at the front. If you can't tell, I'm kind of in a rush, and this is all covered in stuff, but I'm just trying to get this done today. It's a big thing that's in my brain, so I want to get rid of it, and then I can just sort of tidy everything up and send the tail shaft off if it needs to get shortened, finish the wiring and stuff. So without this, I can't do a bunch of other stuff, and time is running out. It's currently the 18th of November, so I've got about a month. Alright, so I've got the new gearbox crossmember bolted in. You can see the new top mount and then the slots as well. So that works pretty good actually. It's already in the middle of the adjustment, and all I've done is move the engine back just a smidge. It's actually off the rack now, so that's pretty good. So all I need to do is just oval the holes on the actual engine mounts a little bit. A little sketchy, it'll be perfectly safe, it's just not great. So just need to oval these a little bit, and then I can bolt the engine in, and then I can slide back a little bit, get that little gap a little bit more, and then the only other thing I have to do other than the tail shaft is just open this hole up a little bit so we can actually not touch the floor anywhere. So up the front here, we've got a clearance to the bell housing, just a tiny little bit. So this can go back a fair bit more. With the gearbox, I just need to cut the hole in the floor. So what's stopping me up the front from bolting the engine mounts in is they are just a little bit off the holes. So what I'm going to do is just open those holes up a little bit and then bolt it all back in. I could modify the crossmember, but given that that's already powder coated, already bolted in, and everything else around it is freshly painted, I don't want to jump in there with an angle grinder. That's what I'd prefer to do, is just open those up, but the engine mounts are replaceable, so I guess if I need to replace engine mounts, I'll just oval those holes out a little bit, and that'll be the end of the problem. So just going to open them up, probably half a hole, bolt them back in, get the engine sitting on its own weight again, move it all back as far as I can, just see how it all suits, and then go from there. Might have to open it some more, might not have to, and then I also have to cut the floor, which I probably should do before I remodify the engine mounts. It's a lot of talking, but I'm trying to work quickly and trying to get this done. Alright, gearbox crossmember done, nice and smooth and clean. So I'll paint that in a minute. I'd like to get it powder coated, but I don't really know if I have the time, to be perfectly honest. And that's the only thing I need to get powder coated, so it's probably not really worth it. Unfortunately, two little spaces have to go underneath this guy, which if I'd known that at the time, I would have made this 3 mil lower, obviously. I'm pretty annoyed about that, but it is what it is. So I could make this a third time and cut the ends off and move it all down a little bit, and no, not happening. Original gearbox mount from the wagon onto the new crossmember with the little spaces, which are annoying. And then that gets the engine roughly where it is now, which gives me the tiniest little bit of room down there, which you can see just. So I can't get my finger through there, but there's a little bit of room. And then I slotted the engine mounts, and of course I checked 5 times and then did it the wrong way the first time, so I was trying to bring the rotor forwards. So slotted them again, went backwards, so when I get some new engine mounts I'll slot them the correct direction. And they're both bolted in nice and hard and solid, and everything's all sweet. So the back is in the air at the moment on the jack and the jack stand. We've got clearance around the shifter hole, which is pretty good, and then I just need to paint this guy and chuck it in. So what a mission that was for probably 20 mil. But as you can see, they're pretty much exactly the same, just the slotted ends. So all the new one did is allow me to move the bolt from there to about halfway. So literally like 15 mil. Probably could have slotted this one enough, to be honest, but I don't want to do that. So let's paint this, and then I'll chuck it in the car, and then the engine should be fully mounted finally, and we can test the tail shaft, which isn't going to fit. Alright, my filming and documenting has gone horribly. So I moved the engine back. That's all mounted, all painted, all put back together. Shifter's hole has been cut out, so it actually fits properly now. So I need to find a shifter still. And then the engine mounts got slotted. First the wrong way after checking like 3 or 4 times, and then the correct way. And then we have a little bit of clearance down here to the gearbox, which is awesome. So now I'm on to wiring things. So I got a battery in the other day, got the relays down the bottom there. So I've started wiring things. Got the coolant temp running down here, got the oil pressure running down here as well. So I'll do this earth cable. I'm going to run all the wires with the earth cable, so it's all nice and neat out the way under the battery, and then sneak it all back through here to the cab. So that'll be all right. So the only thing I'm not 100% sure on is how to wire the dizzy, and not sure if I need to go from the coil to the dizzy, or we'll work that out later. So I was asking a mate of mine about the alternator wiring, and he said that the one I had was an external regulator, which I did ask for an internal one, so bit of a miscommunication there, and I had the wrong alternator, so I've just rung sprints and organised an internally regulated one, so I don't have to have the regulator on the panel here and run wires back and forwards and make it all messy. So I should be able to get an internally regulated one and just have like one wire to it. So I still haven't found or looked for the starter motor. I found the spark plug leads in a brand new box and figured they're all good, and there's only 3 in there, so I need to find another one or buy another set, which is a little bit annoying. So what I'm going to do today is I've got some more plumbing stuff. So I plumbed up the fuel line to the fuel filter, which is now mounted. So to get the fuel filter off, you just undo the 2 hoses, and then this hose clamp just here, and that comes off a little bracket. So that's a lot better than it was. So I just got the hose to go from here to the fuel pump. I've got the blank for the top of the fuel pump here. I've got the right barb for this here, and then I got a new barb for the carby. So should be able to run all those fuel lines. Obviously not the carby one today because the carby's not on there. And then I got a bunch of other stuff. I don't really remember, just barbs and fittings and wires and crimps, and just trying to hustle. So it's the 20th of November and the time crunch is real. I've got pretty much a month. I've got probably 5 weeks, but Christmas and all the things that happened in December, so I need to get into it. So time crunch is here, and filming is going to get even worse than normal. So got a list, or another list, and I'm just going to get into it, try and get this wired. Alright, that's it for this week's episode. This was a huge mission and an absolute pain. I hope you enjoyed the engine going in, and I hope you enjoyed the video. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.